I wrote to Rodney, completely blind, and you know, it's just the simple thing of the more shit you throw against the wall, the more chances some of it's going to stick. And that's what I did. So I just threw it and threw it and threw it, and my shit stuck to Howard Stern.
Well, let's get into that. I mean, when you got on the Howard Stern show, it was huge, and it was like an instant thing when you joined that cast of characters, and it's really the period.
No, nothing instant about anything. I sent my records to him in 1982 in August, and a couple months later, Nancy called me up. I said, my office was my mother's attic. That's where we had the dial-up jokes, and you know, that was my office. You know, by not by choice, by design. That's what I could afford. And she said, "Oh, that guy Howard Stern wants you to call him." And I called him, and I went and sat with him and Robin and Fred, and we had a great time. And at the end of the day, he said, "You're a lot of fun. Come back next week." And I came back every week for 3 years for free. And I didn't know what I was doing. At any point, he could have said, "You know, why don't you stay home next week?" But innately, I thought, I never had any intention of being on the radio or being a comedian, or, you know, you just put one foot in front of the other. All I knew was I wasn't going to get a job. Okay, I'm not going to be a commuter. And then I wound up being a commuter that gets up at fucking 4 o'clock in the morning. That kind of backfired. But, and then when we went to mornings, I'd been passing them notes, and we went to mornings, and we went to Pluto. And it was so fun because, you know, right away, they were already popular in New York. We went to mornings, and everybody, the whole world listened to the show. It was pretty frightening. And then we got syndicated. We were syndicated to Philadelphia and Washington, and the show's doing so great. And I did a lot of interviews, and interviewers always say the same thing. They say, "You know, you guys are so funny, and the show is so great, but how long can it last?" And then 2 years later, we're in Los Angeles and a bunch of other cities, and they're like, "Ah, you know what? You guys are doing great, but how long can it last?" And that went on for 15 years. Next thing you know, we had the E! Show, we had Howard put out a book and the movie, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, but how long can it last? And that is something that you're still going. I mean, you know, of course it's, you know, it was just rolling. It was just rolling like a freight train. But it seemed like it couldn't sustain, but it did. And it not just sustained, it got better and better and better, I thought.
Can you explain your role a little bit on the show? It's explained in the film how you write the jokes instantaneously, but then Howard delivers them, and a lot of people didn't understand that for a number of years.
It's not really a believable story. Like, when I was in there one day a week, sometimes I'd bring in ideas, or, you know, I'd bring in rank outs, or we started doing Stump the Comedian, and of course everybody that called up on the phone was either a racist joke or a filthy joke, and you couldn't trust the listeners, so we'd write jokes for Fred to call in from the other room. The funniest thing is Fred's calling from the other room, and it was you couldn't really figure out who the hell was calling. It sounded like a little old Jewish lady or a little old man, and you couldn't really tell. And there was a guy I worked with in Florida, Kelly Rogers, and on Sunday nights, the manager would stay home. So that's a free-for-all for the comics. It's like, you know, it's like a substitute teacher. So we're there, and we're all breaking balls, and this guy, Kelly Rogers, did a comedian that he called himself Shecky Flemstein. And I thought, Flemstein, what a funny Jewish name. That is just so insultingly wonderful. And then, so Fred's calling up with this weird voice, and he's telling jokes as filthy as you could get without getting in trouble. You know, offensive as you could get without getting in trouble. And at some point I said, "Oh, Mrs. Flemstein's calling again?" "Oh yeah, Mrs. Flemstein's calling again." And pretty soon it was Mrs. Flemstein. And then one day Howard said, "You know, where'd that name Flemstein come from?" I said, "Well, I named her." And Rob was like, "Oh, you named her. You did it. fact, Kelly Rogers is pissed off at me for stealing the name from him. So I'm getting it in the ass for both sides, you know. But that became a really popular thing. And along the way, I would just give him an idea, or I'd scribble a little, you know. And at one point, after a couple of years, when I went in there on Tuesdays, I actually had paper and a Sharpie, and I would actually put something in front of him, like actually reach over. And then he got fired, and then we went to K-Rock. And when I went to K-Rock, even though it was only one day a week, Howard sat at the console, and in front of him was a loose leaf and another loose leaf, opened up, so this here and here, but you could see through here, and in the first place, Robin was over here. And I sat right in front of them, and they actually had a small space for me to write on, so it was calculated. And I'd sit there and write something and flip it over and put it on one side of the loose leaf. So he's talking, and he works in what I wrote. Now he's brilliant. I mean, the average person could never do this. He would look at it. Sometimes he'd say it verbatim, sometimes he'd work it in, sometimes it'd be an insult that I wrote about Fred, and he'd switch it to me, or he'd switch from Gary, or it was about Robin. Sometimes it was going so fast, he'd miss it and circle back around and get it. And not only did that aid his comedy, but now I'm sitting there, so I'm a conduit to get to Howard. So now Fred can write stuff. And Fred would write a little piece of paper, and finally, one day, after a week or so, I said, Fred, Jesus Christ, here's a stack of paper, here's a Sharpie, write it nice and big so he can read it, because if you pass me a little thing, by the time I rewrite it and put it up there, the moment has passed. So now Fred, me, and Howard are all working through Howard. And not only three senses of humor, but three completely distinct senses of humor. Howard's a big, broad guy with a vision, and I'm this punchline idiot that's writing jokes. And Fred is from Pluto. So nobody ever knew what was going to happen next, and it was just, and we just flew, and it was so seamless. People ask me what I do, and I would explain what I just said, and they'd say, yeah, right, yeah, you're writing that stuff. And I ran into people that I couldn't believe they didn't know. You know, and it was kind of a secret. It wasn't a secret, but it was a secret. You know, in the very beginning, when we went to mornings and got really popular, and a lot more people were listening than in the afternoon, people would actually say to me, you know, I heard, somebody told me Robin's black. Is Robin black? I'm like, yeah, because you could not tell. And Howard tell everybody he was, you know, half Jewish and half Italian, so that would encompass 99% of Long Island, you know. And it was really interesting, but we're going along, and people just had no idea. And I would really, you know, I kind of wanted people to have an idea that I'm such an idiot. So I'd sit there and laugh, and they'd break my balls and give me a hard time, which was almost enough to justify me being in that room. Nobody knew that I was adding so much to the comedy because I was just the idiot. They broke my balls, I drank too much, I smoked pot, and I got a good laugh. All right, so put them in the corner. So it's never going to get out. And then Leslie West came on the show. Was this in a documentary?
No.
Leslie West.
He's an inductee, by the way.
Leslie West. Gary comes and says, hey, Hal, the guy on the phone says it's Leslie West. I put him through, and all of a sudden he's talking to Howard, and I looked at Fred, and I said, Dime the donut, that is Leslie West. And Fred, I think so too. And it was Leslie West, and he was a huge fan, and he loved jokes, and almost right away he comes on the show. And he was in a movie called The Money Pit with Tom Hanks, and I think they put him in a pink dress or something. I don't really remember. But he was going to be in a movie, so we got a whole brand new set of choppers, a whole brand new set of teeth. And Leslie comes in, and he's sitting with us, and everybody knew he's a heroin addict and a coke addict. He's a mess, but a wonderful, wonderful guy. And so I wrote this note, but he's sitting there watching me, and I wrote the note and put it up, and Howard said, you know, Robin, Leslie really does have a problem with addiction. he just spent $10,000 on new teeth, and now he wants more teeth. Right? But Leslie goes, oh, so that's what this is. You write them down, and he says them. I'm thinking, now the whole tri-state area knows I'm out of the closet.
That's funny.
Nobody fucking noticed. Nobody. So that flew out. But slowly but surely, people found out, you know. And then we went to the E-show, and there was a lipstick camera with a little bin the size of a piece of paper,